So hey guys, today we're going to be talking about how Yu-Gi-Oh is one of the highest potential, if not the highest potential card game out there, in the sense that you could do basically whatever you want in kind of Yu-Gi-Oh, and we'll go for that in a second. But there is also the glaring issue of okay, but you have like insane balance problems, which is completely true. So right now, well, there's a lot of things to say, but in general going first is a huge issue, but if you make going second too strong, you just get tenpai, which is also a problem. Just not really fun to play against tenpai to an extent, and then not really fun to play against a deck that you have absolutely no chance of beating simply because they went first. So, but both spectrums here pretty bad, and of course, if everyone's on tenpai, then that's also a problem, and a lot of nothing's going to happen, and you'll get a lot of like non games as well. So you have problems either way. I mean, could this all be solved? Well, with the Tenpai issue, maybe if you gave Tenpai like a little bit better of an option for going first, then you might have like slightly more interesting games in that regard. So Tenpai can go first a little bit better. But also like then you have the issue of okay, but now that we have a tier 0 deck, so that's a problem as well. But yeah, let's just not think about that too much for today. So today we're going to be talking about how with Yu-Gi-Oh, you actually have the highest potential, just in general. As far as I know, there aren't any other card games like it. So with Yu-Gi-Oh, you have a lot of different options that you are not afforded in other card games. So for example, one of the things is that you have no mana system, so what you're able to do is a lot more in one turn than other card games. And just off of that fact, having no like mana restrictions to kind of rein in your plays, that's a small part, honestly. I mean, it's a big part, yet it's also a small part because there's also the flexibility that you have from just how uh, the game has certain aspects to it. So, for example, with attack and defense position existing, that allows you a lot more options in like with battle phase and all that, right? So let's say I am the going first player. I summon my monster in attack, so it's not necessarily going to be like Gambler of Legend. So let's just use Baron de Fleur as an example, right? So let's assume my end board is just Baron de Fleur pass. So in this case, I have several different options with Baron. So you have actually 6 different zones that you can summon Baron in, and it actually does genuinely matter if you do summon Baron to a extra monster zone or a main monster zone, and which main monster zone actually has an effect as well. So we have like the idea of Longirsu having this arrow pointing mechanic. So if you summon to EMZ, your Baron is safe from Longirsu. And then if you summon to a Geonator zone, which happens to be all of the zones that Longirsu covers. So if you play around Geonator, you're actually also, or playing around Geonator, you're playing into Longirsu randomly. But yeah, if you're playing around, I guess, Longirsu, you're playing into Geonator, threatening to swap your Baron. So that's a thing. And then technically, if you summon below an extra monster zone, you're actually playing into 2 different things as well. You have like Magnite Blue Sky, which is able to search cards. And the worst zone I think that you could summon to is um the extra monster zone. So either the left or right one, and then Girsu can put a token below that, allowing 2 searches from Blue Sky. So you give your opponent 1 additional search on Blue Sky. There's also if you place under your being threatened now by Anima right here. So yeah, it's all kind of problematic here and there in what you do. And then of course your attack and defense position does matter. So it depends on the deck a little bit. But let's say we're against let's say it's kind of just K9, right? So if we summon Baron in defense, this is 2.4k defense, so Ripper does not destroy Baron by battle here, but this does actually allow your opponent to then threaten Zeus or make Zeus and cast Zeus your board afterwards. So idea of maybe you have hand traps and such, so you can prevent Ripper effect to search or whatnot. Maybe it's some back row like Imperm. So let's say the line is something like this, okay? Normal summon, Noroi, Kyoko for whatever reason doesn't resolve. Don't worry about that too much. Maybe they just choose not to use it because they think they can use it later for whatever reason. We make Ripper an attack here, Ripper effect, and then this gets Imperm, so you get no Ripper search. So from this point, you can go battle and make Zeus to wipe the board out, or if we actually have Baron in attack position, that actually isn't something you can do anymore because the Ripper would just get destroyed by that battle. And that's like a thing to consider. But there's also the idea of if we actually summon this in defense, it's actually also playing around Lightning Storm, which would destroy the Baron. And maybe in cases where you don't even have back row, if you summon Baron in defense position actually, and your opponent's not on a XYZ deck, then you're actually playing around Lightning Storm because you summon in defense position and you're playing around Lightning Storm. So every little small decision here actually has some form of impact, especially when you have no like knowledge of what your opponent's playing. They could be on any of those strategies, and all those different strategies, they have different things where just different zone placement or different attack defense position is going to negatively impact the strength of your board and give your opponent more options or less options depending on like what zones you summon to and whatnot, which it ends up actually being impactful here. And then there's also what the individual cards in Yu-Gi-Oh are capable of. So for example, if we look at, we'll go with Longirsu here. Longirsu actually has an assortment of different things you can do. So this has the effect where this link card cannot be destroyed by card effects, so you simply have to link Longirsu and it becomes indestructible by card effects. Then you have targeting two of your banished machine monsters, shuffle them into the deck, and then there's an optional effect to send a linked monster your opponent controls to the graveyard. And then you can actually XYZ summon a Dingirsu on top of Longirsu. So you have three different kind of options that you can do on top of the Longirsu, and then the Girsu, the Dingirsu, it has like two different effects and the continuous effect to protect as well. So you can send or attach a banished machine monster, I believe. So all of these are different factors to why I guess game has such high potential. And then there's also the fact that you can do essentially whatever you want with the card text. As long as you can describe it with the English language, it becomes possible to make it a card effect, right? So what's the most outlandish kind of effect that we could think about? Well, I guess in this case, maybe yugioh friendship. Offer your opponent a handshake. If they accept your handshake, each player's life points become half the combined life points of both players. If you have unity in your hand and show it to your opponent, they must accept the handshake. So I mean, on paper, I guess, like, or in the paper game, you know, like TCG, OCG, I believe you only need to acknowledge the handshake and you don't actually need to do the handshake. I mean, it's like kind of funny and kind of goofy, but yeah. Do you have any other card games where you can essentially force your opponent to shake your hand? Because, like, if you input the card text on the card, then, you know, well, in this case, it's like if you can describe something, you input it on a card, and then it becomes the card effect, right? So we could do just about anything we wanted with a card, right? So let's say I want to shuffle a card from my hand to my opponent's deck, or that type of thing. There are some cards that can do that now, or right now, but it's kind of niche. I think there's only like maybe two cards that do something like this. But yeah, if you do that, it has like some ruling issues and some issues of, oh, I actually forgot to give this card back to my opponent, which sucks when you're playing like in person. But aside from that, you can still have like whatever type of effect you want on cards. So for example, we have True Name, which I think is like kind of cool, just a little bit. Declare one card name, excavate the top card of your deck, and if it is the declared card, add it to your hand. Then you can add to your hand or special summon one divine monster from your deck, otherwise send it to the graveyard. So you just call the top card of your deck, and then you just add that card, right? Pretty cool. And then you also have concepts like, I guess Therion's like pretty neat, where if you have a card in the graveyard that matches the conditions for a Therion special summon, you can just summon these guys straight from the hand, which is pretty cool, and their playstyle is pretty cool in general, right? With the Therion cards. And then what other archetypes do we have that are kind of interesting in how they play? Yeah, not a lot coming to mind right now because not a lot of the ones we've been getting recently kinda lame. Let's see. We have, I guess, like Vanquish Soul was universally accepted to be relatively cool, being kind of like representation and themed around like uh, fighting games, just in general. So you're like tagging out different guys. And now that I think about it, isn't Rock of the Vanquisher just like a game map? So this is basically like a loading screen, right? Oh wow. Wait, this card's basically just a loading screen, isn't it? Huh. Damn. Same with like Stake Your Soul kinda, right? This is just the stage which you're doing the fight on, basically, right? Oh. Yeah, I didn't even realize that. Huh. And then these cards, like the spells and traps, are like the special moves of the fighters. And you're also able to kind of like tag out your fighters with each other, and that's kind of a thing. I guess it'd be like a tag fighter, kinda. So that's pretty neat. And then you have like a relatively large assortment of effects. So you have like cards like Ninja. So playstyle on Ninja is a little bit interesting. Just a little bit. I mean, the deck as a whole, not that great, but conceptually pretty cool. Like you're putting uh your opponent's cards to sleep, and then you're kind of tiptoeing and assassinating your opponent. Kind of, like you're putting their cards to sleep, then going around them, kind of ninja-like, if you think about it, right? And then with let's see, the insane flexibility on your cards, you can just do pretty much whatever you want. Like yugioh friendship, being able to just uh offer your opponent a handshake, or your opponent must shake your hand, right? It gets pretty wild. So we could do just about anything, really. So we have, I guess, what was the name of this card even? I don't remember. I think it was Sophia, maybe? Sophia, Goddess of Rebirth. When this card is special, summon banish all other cards from both players' hands, fields, and graveyards. Cards in effect cannot be activated in response to this effect's activation. You have this insane kind of card with like Sophia. You have some weaker cards that still do things like, I guess, Moko Moko, I guess, right? Where it's just, you flip this over, draw one card, and it can't be destroyed by battle, which is fairly, I guess it's like kind of strong in some cases. Uh, I think like Doom King, pretty cool also. This card just, uh, when you pair it with Zombie World, you can use the effect to negate a monster effect. So basically, you would negate any monster effects that activate on the field or in the graveyard, and you'd banish a monster from the field or graveyard as well. And also, that this guy just comes back pretty frequently because if there is any um, field spell, this guy will come back from the graveyard, which is pretty cool. Um, One of the more interesting card designs that I usually remember is Return of the Zombie. So when you pair this with Zombie World, this makes it so when it says zombie monster, it's more or less referring to just monster instead, right? So this card has insane flexibility despite not having that much card text, honestly. The main thing that we have to care about is just this one line. We can worry about the second like another time, but if you banish one zombie monster on the field, well, you can then special summon a zombie monster from the graveyard, right? But what you do here depends on the player that controlled it. So if I banish my own monster, I can then special summon a monster from my graveyard and use this card as kind of a monster reborn. If I banish a monster from my opponent's field, I can also use this as a form of removal. But then there's also the idea that I can actually use this as a way to dodge card effects as well. So, for example, we have the idea of like, let's say, um, a targeted negate. So let's say we have Chisao negate. So we have like, let's say, Uni-Zombie effect descend. I can just use that effect, and then my opponent tries to chain Chisao. I can banish to dodge the targeting on Chisao to then still resolve like Uni-Zombie, I guess, right? Or if I want to remove the Chisao, I can banish Chisao and then reborn one of my opponent's monsters. So it's also like non-targeting removal here, non-targeting banish, which means I can actually change my mind during the resolution of this card effect if something else were to chain later, right? Like maybe Imperm on Uni-Zombie, I don't even have to commit to bashing the Uni-Zombie here with the return. I can just change my mind and banish like a different monster in this case. So let's assume my opponent maybe controls a Baron de Fleur. I can banish that as well. So pretty neat. And it's kind of like, honestly, you can think of Yu-Gi-Oh card text as almost like a coding language, right? Where if you understand how the code works, and how to write lines of code, you can make just about anything you want, conceptually. I mean, in practice, there's some things that are just way too broken, so you kind of have to do those things, and then that restricts your options. But if we look at how the game is kind of designed, you can do just about like whatever you want in terms of card design. If you were like actually making cards for Yu-Gi-Oh, right? You can make a card where let's see, what would be something ridiculous, but still like almost reasonable. How about uh, I have a card that allows me to, let's say, randomly reveal cards from my opponent's hand, or I get to pick, but I won't get to see what the cards they have, right? Beforehand. So I'll just pick a card, they reveal it, and then that card cannot be activated or used for anything until the end of the next turn. Maybe. Something like that would be doable. And to play around this, you could make it so that your hand is actually revealed at all times. So that effect just doesn't work anymore because you can't reveal something that's already revealed, I guess, right? And that becomes something that you can do potentially to play around a wacky effect with a wacky method, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, you have a lot of potential in what you can do with the cards, and you have a lot of different potential plays and options to play through whatever your opponent has. Like as you can see with like Return of the Zombies. I mean, it's not like the effect can kind of do it, but I mean the setup that this card requires makes it a little bit more rough. Set up situations where this would actually come up, but the idea is still pretty solid. Where I could do a whole lot with Return of the Zombies. So like I could threaten to attack a certain monster, and then I could threaten stuff with Return of Zombies. So you can just try like two different forms of removal on my guy, but then I can still remove like one of your guys with Return of the Zombies as well. Like a lot of flexibility we have here. Somewhat, kind of, with this card that requires setup to be in the position where you'd be able to do that, but still. You have ideas of like, because your opponent did this thing, you can do that thing as well, you know? Like with all of the different Baron examples I gave earlier. Where because you did a thing, I can do a different thing. And then there are certain cards that you have to play around that you might not have information on as well, where if you play around this card, that actually doesn't play around the other card, which also makes the game interesting in a few ways. So, yeah, you have a high ceiling on what you're allowed to do, and more options on what you're allowed to do in general, even in like the base game before we even consider the card text, right? Just purely based on like how many different places you can put cards, how many cards you can activate in any given turn, how you utilize your cards can change because of how many different things you're actually allowed to do. So even if we were to go to like kind of older Yu-Gi-Oh, right? If I were to set Sangan, Sangan can then add any card from my deck to a hand. And I guess also worth mentioning is that because you don't have mana costs, whenever you have a card, just in general, like it's not going to apply to necessarily every card, but all of your cards will be somewhat playable in the sense that, you know, like if I drew a board wipe in a different game, that board wipe might have like high costs and not be able to be immediately used. But if I have Raigeki, I can just drop that sucker and, you know, wipe my opponent's board. Well, sometimes it kind of depends, but, you know, you have the idea that, you know, you do whatever you want with your cards. As long as you have your cards, I suppose, right? So in terms of like potential with consistency, you could make a lot more games just more live, I guess, like where you don't have a completely dead game where um just one player is completely unable to play for some reason, and it might not be something to do with like matchup or anything. It would be in this case, I guess, just having a hand that's unplayable because you have, let's say, all of the cards in my hand are like 9 mana cost or something. Whereas since we have no mana cost here, we could potentially use our cards. Like maybe Doom King, not so great to open in some instances, maybe better in others. But for the most part, like if I have Doom King, I'll still be able to do things with Doom King, and I won't have any restrictions that I need to worry about. Like you can't send Doom King to the graveyard and activate its effect because you don't have enough mana to do all that. So you don't have to worry about that, I guess, right? If that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, potential really high on these cards in general. But yeah, the game balancing is the main issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! If you did finish, well, if you did a solid and made the game more balanced, I think it would give you more options, kind of, and you wouldn't be pigeonholed by kind of like the meta or cards not being good enough. So, resulting in kind of non-games because you won't be able to activate or do anything with your cards in the first place because they're too weak versus like other cards being like too strong. So you have no choice but to play those cards, you know, or cards with a similar level, which prevents you from doing some fun stuff, you know. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.